Well, hey, good morning and welcome to First Congregational Church's online service. My name's Tom, and you got me in my fancy duds today because I was just doing a funeral. And welcome hanging out with us. This is cool. Now, we're in the middle of our final series of Ordinary Time called The King and a Kingdom, which has 3 parts ending with Christ the King Sunday next week, which also ends the whole liturgical year out. So that means this is the culmination of the entire liturgical calendar journey from Advent, Christmastide, Epiphany, Lent, Eastertide, Pentecost, all the way through Ordinary Time, in which Christ is crowned ruler of all, but also takes into effect the nature of that rule by following the narratives of Christ. So when we say king and kingdom, what do we mean? Especially since a monarchy seems so foreign to many of our ears. And that is what we will be exploring for the next couple of weeks. This one and next week is the last week. Now, this passage here is easy to get wrong if you don't know the narrative backdrop behind the sayings Jesus is talking about here. So Jesus starts to speak apocalyptically, and our established theology is going to jump forward to the end of the world. But Jesus is not speaking of that. He's speaking of the end of a world, and we kind of confuse all this apocalyptic language Jesus has with that. And we all build our lives around some central scheduler, right? Like school schedules, sports schedules, work schedules. These events seem to have the authority to dictate our schedules and calendars. You know, something's happening in one of these events, we're making sure we gotta be there because it has so much weight to it. But then comes a holiday or a snow day, and all of a sudden we feel the cessation of that authority's pull on our life. We feel light. We feel no guilt for pausing, no shame for not showing up, right? Because no one else is going to be there. It's a holiday, and we can breathe. So even when these forces are good in nature, the gravity of them weighs upon us like the sun, brings all the planets into orbit around it, right? Keeps us aimed on a certain trajectory. So what happens when your child develops brain trauma from all the impact sports, or they have a learning disability that causes them not to perform academically like expected, or you get laid off from a job? All of these central things that dictate your schedules and where you're going to be and what you're going to do. What if the center of your world shifted? All of that, you're going to feel the effects of something like a small apocalypse for your world. And in today's passage, Jesus is speaking of this kind of shift for the people of Jerusalem. Their beloved temple, around which their whole religious, economic, political, and cultural world rotates, is predicted to be destroyed. This is a big event. It's a big deal. So Jesus finished his pilgrimage to Jerusalem for the Passover observance. Thousands of other pilgrims joined him, traveling along with him, and they heard him teach along the way. And the people in power have tried to throw Jesus off course with trick questions and plots of murder and ultimately betrayal. Not fun. Now, Jesus entered Jerusalem and claimed the throne, and then cleaned out the extortive money-making vendors in the temple. 2 things that were serious things to do. So the only thing left is to rally 500,000 folks who are already there in Jerusalem for the holiday into a military uprising against Rome. Right? Those in power in Rome and Jerusalem, they're tensely watching what he's going to do. And instead of claiming the temple for himself, Jesus does something absolutely shocking, because this would have been the common ground banner to lead a military rebellion against Rome. Claim the temple. Instead of claiming it, he predicts its destruction. We just didn't see this coming, right? Jesus predicts a military siege from Rome against the coming rebellion that will feel like the end of their world. So he gives them some survival tactics for his followers on how to be after their world has this severe hit. So if you ever read a passage like this, where it talks about all this apocalyptic end of the world stuff, and you're thinking that Jesus is predicting the end of the world and all of human history, then you haven't grasped the gravity of the passage of the people who are hearing it. Jesus is laying out the pattern by which we cling to authority structures to dictate our identity and what happens when we go to war for them. And he gives the warning that non-violent resistance steeped in love is the only force powerful enough to endure beyond apocalypse. So, with that said, let's explore this passage a little bit at a time and see what it has for us. See you in a minute. All right, the holidays are fast approaching, and with the holidays comes the busy rush of extra parties and dinners and gift buying and family gatherings. And my question is, why is it that we tax our already overburdened schedules and budgets with more? Right? This event called the holidays has enough gravity to bring our lives into orbit around it. Now, how successful would you be if you wanted to start a brand new holiday that competed with Christmas, but in July? Like, everyone would need to decorate their houses and prepare meals and shop for gifts and have a few extra days off of work, right? It ain't gonna work. Your workplace is gonna think you're crazy for trying to start a brand new holiday, and they're not gonna recognize it as legit. Your family's probably gonna reject it because they can't afford to have another holiday in the middle of the summer, and they just don't have time for it. It would just not have the same gravity as Christmas does, a time that we also don't have the time or money to participate in, but we do anyways. Why is that? Because it's an already established, recognized, and participated holiday that brings enough joy that we believe the costs are actually worth it. Now, Jesus and his followers from rural Galilee are walking around the city of Jerusalem. And it says that certain folks are talking about how beautiful the temple was and how adorned with beautiful stones and rich gifts that the temple has. And Jesus says, these things that have caught your attention, there will come a time when it will be utterly destroyed, all of it. Not one of these pretty stones that you're admiring is going to be left on top of another. Okay, now the gravity of this statement is not felt in the mere reading of these words. Right? We have to understand how central this temple was to their very existence. The temple was not just a church in the city that they all went to. It was the central hub of culture, economics, education, politics, and religion. Like a one-stop shop for an entire people's identity and meaning and operation. The temple was to these people like the sun is to our solar system. Now, occupying Rome knew this fact, and they let it be in hopes of keeping the population peaceful and paying their taxes. But if things were not peaceful, there would be no need to keep this, temple thing in place. So Jesus' words here are not really stemming from supernatural visions of destruction of the end of the world that he sees like in his dreams. He knows the pieces in play. He knows the hearts of the people. They desire to be free of occupying Roman forces. He knows that they're not going to compromise their culture with Roman culture for very long. And he knows that the people believe God's going to swoop in and rescue them if they declare war. But he also knows the power of the Romans, their armies, could just come in and crush a resistance and destroy the center of their culture, economy, religion, and life to prevent further war. It would be the apocalyptic end of their world. And it was in 70 AD. Now, there are certain things in life, our life, that have gravity. And like the sun, they bring the different elements of our life into orbit around it. And they organize us and plan our schedules, right? A certain family member always has this holiday dinner, or a certain school event always takes place on a certain weekend, or a citywide event, or a national sports game, elections, holidays, movie releases, right? It's when something has enough significance that we orbit our schedules and resources around it. So what happens when that thing of gravity stops? The loved one who always prepares Thanksgiving moves away, or the kids graduate and the school things aren't there anymore. The tradition dies out, or it can feel like our entire universe is falling apart because that thing that kept our life in predictable orbit has changed. It's the end of the world as we know it, as the great theologians from the 80s, Michael Stipe from REM, said. This is what Jesus is referring to in this passage, but very specifically for the hearers of this, it's the destruction of their temple. So what do we do when the world ends? That's what's next. All right, we love a good prophecy. Like, how many stories have the chosen one as an element of their narrative, right? Star Wars, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, just to name a few that are super popular. Like, we seem to gravitate towards these end of the world predictions here. This is not new, right? When we're reading this passage, we think, oh my gosh, there's the chosen one, has a vision, and the end of the world is here, right? But this isn't new thinking. German mathematician and astrologer Johannes Stoffler predicted that a great flood would cover the world on February 25th of 1524. And it didn't happen, even though this big rich guy built a 3-story ark to protect himself from the coming flood. Never happened. And around the turn of the 19th century in Leeds, England, this chicken kept laying eggs which had the words "Christ is coming" written on them. Freaked everybody out that Judgment Day was upon them. They thought the end of the world, oh my God. Turns out the owner would collect the eggs and write the words on them and then put them back in the chicken, which is totally gross if you ask me. Now, among the most prolific modern predictors of the end of the world is Harold Camping. He's publicly predicted the end of the world as many as like 12 times. And he's been wrong every time because we're all still here. And recently his prediction was for May 21st, 2011, a date that he calculated to be exactly 7,000 years after the biblical flood narrative in Genesis. And then when that date passed without incident, he said he was flabbergasted that the end did not happen. He was sure that like the 12th time was the time, I guess. I don't know. Remember the Mayan calendar apocalypse of 2012 when the Mayan calendar ended and so was the world? It didn't happen. And then there was Y2K when the computer apocalypse, which we're encouraged to stock up on SpaghettiOs and black-eyed peas for survival, right? Humans seem to have this obsession with apocalyptic folk tales, and Christians are no different. Like Pat Robertson predicted the end of the world in 1982. Didn't happen. Hal Lindsey predicted the end of the world in 1988. Didn't happen. Jack Van Impe has like this pseudo news show when I was growing up, and he reads the Bible with the newspaper and he would be like, I predicted this moment in the news exactly because it's right here in Revelation and it says this. And then his wife was the co-host and she says, yes, you did, Jack. Nope, didn't happen. And then John Hagee, he's the most recent one with all the blood moon cycles. We just had one this week. I didn't hear from Hagee, so maybe he's made up his mind that every time a blood moon eclipse is here, it's not the end of the world. Maybe he's learned his lesson since he's been wrong every dang time. I don't know. So when Jesus is saying things in the next passage like, there's going to be wars and disturbances and then the end will come. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, earthquakes, plagues, famine, fear, signs in the skies. Like we tend to think he's talking about the present day, the end of the world in the future, because frankly, these things happen in our present day. They have happened throughout all history. But Christ is not talking about the end of the world. He's talking about the end of their world, which rotated around the temple. And then he's telling them what to do about it when it happens. So if this passage triggers fear, we're reading it wrong, because fear brings us into fight or flight or freeze reactions, none of which are going to be helpful in this scenario. So the early Christians who saw the armies of Rome descending upon Jerusalem in 70 AD, they actually took Jesus' advice and they headed for the mountains. Now they didn't do it in a prepper kind of a way and just like rough it. They went to a city called Pella. Then there was a flight of the Christians to the city Pella and they lived there. And they started a new movement of Christianity that was not based on temple worship. And then this new movement had an upper hand in realigning themselves to fit into a different society when everyone else was rallying around the temple for war. They pivoted, however, up in Pella. They pivoted and adapted while everyone else defended what used to be and was about to be destroyed. Now, society in our day and age has gone through seismic shifts in our day too. And we're urged not to hole up in a mountain and weather it out like preppers, but instead form new communities within our context, rooted in who we are, but ready to pivot. Because anyone that wants to reestablish a nostalgic past era is actually lying to you. It's not going to come back. It's gone. We're a new place, new people, and we're moving forward. Instead, Christ is actually urging us to find new centers of gravity around which our lives and communities can rotate. Now, it takes time. It takes patience, it takes insight, it takes wisdom, and that is what Christ is helping them and eventually us to take note of. So how does this passage end off? All right, if you thought the last passage sounded scary, this next section sounds even scarier. Unless you're like the prepper who's stockpiling guns and canned goods and water for such an event, and you're headed for the mountains, and you're just like getting some kind of exhilaration out of it. But if you're just a regular person humbly concerned with making it through the day like the rest of us, I have no interest in dying for glory and recognition and honor. I just like to live a quiet life doing all the good I can in the community, right? So when Jesus says all these things are going to happen to those who stand up for good, betrayals and persecutions and arrests and even death, we can assume that if we're following Christ, then we too should be experiencing these things. And that is actually not so, fortunately. What these assumptions can do is give us justification for our own pride. We can pridefully or arrogantly make ourselves the enemy of a person, a group, or an idea. And the natural consequences of this that comes towards us, where people oppose us, are the above hardships that we see that Christ defined out. Then we assume that we're doing what God wants us to do because we're experiencing the persecution he told us about, right? For instance, we can insert our morality into another person's life, saying, oh, you shouldn't do that. And then you get a sharp rejection. And then we say, it's because I'm doing the right thing, or I am in the right way, right? Or we can impose a value upon a group of people, and I cannot believe that they wear that thing in the public, right? And then receive criticisms, and rightly so, I might add. Injecting our nose and opinions into other people's lives and business isn't what's going on in this passage. So you might be thinking to yourself, certainly there are times when we should stand up for something we believe in or someone experiencing bullying or oppression, and you are absolutely right. There's plenty of room for that in this thought and action in God's plan for the world. But it takes great humility to do this in a way that leads to the redemption of our souls, as Christ put it at the end of this passage. When we assume that we've arrived, we're right, and everything outside of that perception is utterly wrong, and then we must go and impose our mindset upon the world and attempt to conform them to everything that we know and everything that we believe, then that is a form of pride. And this is actually a hidden form of pride because we assume that our own perceptions are God's perceptions, and we make ourselves infallible. We actually make ourselves infallible towards the end because we say, oh, I'm doing this for Christ, I'm doing this for God, I'm doing it for the right reasons, right? And then we'll say things, God told me, or the Bible says, and then we just inject our ideals and our moralities and our opinions into other people's lives, and then we experience resistance, and then we say, this is the persecution Jesus spoke of, and it's actually not. The challenge for us today is to find both a confidence in who we are without the temptation to change the outer world to match our inner vision of utopia, right? We often say things like, if everybody would just, fill in the blank with impossible expectation. Or we'll say things like, if everybody just stop, fill in the blank with personal irritations. What we need is a confidence in our strength and gift to offer, but paired with a humility that sees other people's gifts and strengths as well, and then possibly partner with them in ways that better our world. And this is what Christ says will redeem our souls from prideful attempts to save the world through imposing ourselves upon it, so that we can learn the humility of being human together, of being wrong sometimes and being right sometimes too, of being weak sometimes and needing help, and of being strong other times. And then this pliability and moldability makes us adapt with wisdom to situations with love. And that is what happens for the apostles in the book of Acts. And that is what can happen in our life too. So let's give it the best shot we can. Let's at least try, anyway. Well, hey, thanks for joining me in my office with my fancy suit coats and stuff. And this was episode number 2 of King and Kingdom, and we have episode 3 next week, which will conclude the entire liturgical year before we start gasp Advent. I know, it's like around the corner. Christmas time, holiday times, it's here, it's coming, it's fast. Now, if you experience any hope, help, and healing from this message, it was helpful for you in some kind of way, there's a couple ways you can partner with us. You can like our pages on Facebook, on Instagram, subscribe on YouTube, where we post all of our content, what's happening in our community, in town, and all of this content and everything goes there. You can also partner with us financially, because there's a little linky thing on the bottom of your screen here, and you can type it into your little searchy bar up here, and you can, it'll take you right to a page where you can give a one-time gift, or you can do recurring giving and partner with us financially, and we would appreciate anything to make sure that these keep happening. Now, I'll see you next week for part number 3 of King and Kingdom, and we will conclude out with Christ the King Sunday. So peace out. Thanks for joining us. Bye. Not bad, try it.